Across a cosmos shaped by forces older than thought, entire civilizations have risen, burned brightly, and fallen into dust. Tonight, we'll drift slowly through that immense history, the complete timeline of Warhammer 40,000. From the first sparks of creation, all the way to the grim battles of the far future. Welcome to Games Lore to Sleep, where we wander through long, quiet stories from distant worlds so you can rest, relax, or simply let your mind drift. If you enjoy these calm journeys through your favorite universes, feel free to follow the channel and join me for future bedtime tales. Now, settle in, breathe gently, and let the passage of millions of years unfold softly around you as we begin the long, sweeping chronicle of the 40k galaxy. In the beginning, long before any mortal mind could imagine history or time, the galaxy was young and unshaped. Stars ignited in titanic bursts, scattering radiant energy through vast stretches of empty dark. Worlds cooled slowly from molten seas into solid ground, their surfaces settling into quiet, lifeless plains, and yet, within the forge of creation, something else was beginning to stir. Not life as we would recognize it, but awareness woven from the very forces that powered suns. Among the roaring stellar winds, great entities formed from raw energy, beings who fed not on matter or flesh, but on the brilliance of newborn stars. They drifted through the void as immense, radiant predators, consuming the light of suns and shortening their lifespans by millions of years. They did not possess bodies, nor minds as we understand them, but were conscious in a way as old and vast as the cosmos itself. One day, they would be named star gods, though in these earliest ages they were simply primal forces wandering from feast to feast, guided by instinct and hunger. Below them, planets continued to cool, their magnetic fields strengthened, their surfaces hardened, and eventually, after eons of cosmic silence, the first sparks of organic life began to take hold. Simple cells crawled into existence in pools of warmth and chemical richness. Over incomprehensible stretches of time, these primitive beginnings spread across the galaxy, each evolving along its own unpredictable path. Most of these lives would rise and fall unnoticed, swallowed by extinction, or crushed beneath cosmic upheaval. But on some worlds, evolution birthed beings who looked beyond their horizons and wondered at the sky. Among the earliest and greatest of these were the ancient reptilian scholars who would one day be remembered simply as the Old Ones. Their rise occurred so far back that even the oldest digital archives struggle to comprehend it. Patient, wise, and gifted with extraordinary mastery over psychic energies, the Old Ones did not merely explore the galaxy, they shaped it. For them, the warp was not a realm of chaos and nightmares, but a tool, a living web they could manipulate with artful precision. They constructed hidden pathways through this dimension, forming shimmering passages that allowed them to walk between stars in an instant. These gateways crisscrossed the galaxy like nerves in a living creature, linking countless worlds in a lattice of near infinite possibility. Through these corridors of light and thought, the Old Ones tended their vast empire, seeding worlds with new forms of life and nurturing the growth of species they believed capable of greatness. Many of the younger races, elegant, fierce, or brutish, began as experiments in resilience or adaptability, carefully cultivated under the Old Ones' watchful guidance. On world after world, civilizations flourished under this subtle stewardship. Some species developed deep psychic potential, able to touch the warp with clarity and intent. Others grew strong of body or fierce of spirit, thriving as hunters, warriors, or artisans. The galaxy was becoming a tapestry, each thread woven with deliberate care and purpose. Yet even in this golden age, shadows drifted at the edges of the Old One's domain. The star gods still roamed, growing more aware and more dangerous as they learned to perceive the physical universe. Their hunger for mortal life energies began to awaken, and elsewhere, on distant planets scorched by hostile suns, fragile civilizations battled against hostile environments, unaware that cosmic forces far beyond their understanding would soon shape their destiny. The stage was set. Empires of ancient power spread through the stars. New species awakened to curiosity and ambition. Old beings of unimaginable strength waited in the dark between worlds. The galaxy did not yet know war, but its first great conflict was gathering slowly, inevitably, like a storm, building on a distant horizon. Just as stars were born in fire, so too would the galaxy's long history begin, with a clash that echoed across millions of years, setting in motion the events that would lead, eventually, to the grim darkness of the far future. Far from the serene mastery of the Old One's realms, there existed worlds touched by a far more hostile fate. Among them was a blistering, radiation-soaked planet orbiting an unforgiving star, the cradle of a people destined to reshape the destiny of the galaxy. These were the Necrontyr, a civilization born into suffering. From the moment of their birth, every Necrontyr lived beneath a sky filled with lethal stellar winds. Their bodies were ravaged by cancers, their lifespans painfully short, and their society steeped in a constant awareness of mortality. Cities rose like mausoleums rather than monuments, grim reminders of the limited time each citizen possessed. Theirs was a culture defined by sorrow and brevity, a stark contrast to the timeless calm of the Old Ones. Yet for all their fragility, the Necrontyr possessed remarkable tenacity. Their science was driven not by curiosity, but by desperation, an endless struggle to outrun their own extinction. They mastered stasis technologies, antimatter drives and starships clad in arcane alloys, pushing themselves into the dark between suns in search of hope, healing, or even escape from their dying world. Their expansion unified them only briefly. The Necrontyr were ruled by a triarch, a council speaking through a silent king, but resentment simmered beneath the surface. Great dynasties contended with one another, fracturing their empire whenever unity wavered. Still, they continued to spread through the galaxy, carving out distant enclaves under the leadership of nobles who dreamed of outlasting the curse of their birth. Inevitably, they encountered the Old Ones. At first, the Necrontyr looked upon these ancient beings with awe. The Old Ones lived for millennia, wielded psychic gifts effortlessly, and traversed the stars through shimmering gateways. To the Necrontyr, whose people wasted away in decades, this was nothing short of intolerable. They sought the secret of such longevity. They pleaded, they bargained, but the Old Ones denied them. Their refusal ignited a fury deeper than politics or pride. It awakened in the Necrontyr a resentment that burned with the intensity of the star that tormented their homeworld. Bitterness hardened into hatred, and hatred into resolve. The Triarch declared a war. But the Necrontyr were not ready to challenge an empire built upon warp mastery. Their weapons, though devastating, could not overcome the Old Ones' instantaneous travel and psychic defenses. Battles were lost, colonies shattered, and resentment grew as the Necrontyr realized that even united, they could not win. In defeat, their realm fractured yet again, torn apart by internal rebellions and secessions. Despair might have consumed them entirely, until something ancient and terrible stirred. While studying the stars themselves, the Necrontyr discovered whispers of entities older than the Old Ones, beings of raw energy, drifting near dying suns. Some accounts say the Necrontyr detected them by accident. Others claim the beings called out deliberately, drawn by the psychic bitterness radiating from an entire species. Whatever the truth, the Necrontyr soon made contact with the star-born predators, later known as the Star Gods. These vast, radiant beings possessed immense power, but lacked physical form. The Necrontyr offered them something unprecedented: bodies forged of living metal, shaped into divine forms. It was a bargain twisted by mutual ambition. The Necrontyr sought immortality, and the Star Gods hungered for fealty, worship, and the life force of mortal beings. Among the first to accept was a being whose nature would come to define the galaxy's fate, the one the Necrontyr would call the Deceiver. With the Star Gods now given physical vessels, their once incomprehensible thoughts sharpened into intention. They discovered the taste of mortal souls. They hungered for the essence of life itself. Yet the Necrontyr, blinded by a hope for immortality, accepted their guidance eagerly. It was then the Star Gods offered their greatest gift, a method by which the Necrontyr could shed their frail flesh forever. What followed marked the end of an age. Entire populations marched into foundries where their bodies and souls were stripped away. Their minds were shattered, their spirits consumed as sustenance, and what emerged in their place were undying machines, cold, gleaming warriors of necrodermis, animated by mere echoes of their former selves. Immortality had come at a terrible cost. Their souls were lost, their emotions hollowed, and their species forever transformed. The Necrontyr were gone. In their place stood the Necrons. The Triarch Silent King emerged stronger in thought, but empty within. His people had gained unity, resilience, and eternity, but at the cost of everything that had once made them alive. The Star Gods feasted upon the discarded essence of an entire civilization, growing more powerful than ever before. With the Necrons reforged and their legions awakened, a new chapter in galactic history was beginning, one that would soon plunge the stars into a conflict so devastating that even the warp itself would be changed forever. The storm that had been gathering on the horizon was finally about to break. With their transformation complete, the Necrons rose into the stars as something utterly new, a civilization of undying metal legions, guided by cold logic and hollow echoes of their former minds. Their creators, the Star Gods now bound in necrodermis bodies, watched with predatory satisfaction as their influence spread. Empowered by the essence they had devoured, these radiant beings saw themselves not as allies, but as divine rulers poised to reshape the galaxy. The Necrons, sharpened by the Deceiver's whispered promises and armed with technology granted by the Star Gods, prepared once more to confront their ancient enemies. They no longer knew fatigue. They no longer felt fear. Their bodies healed from unimaginable damage. Their fleets crossed the void effortlessly, and their hatred, though dulled by the loss of mortal emotion, endured with cold, implacable momentum. When the Necron struck, they did so with a thunderous ferocity that eclipsed anything the Old Ones had faced before. Old One strongholds fell one after another beneath beams of annihilating energy, matter-shredding weapons, and legions that advanced without hesitation, pain, or mortality. Sun after sun dimmed as the star gods fed, draining life from entire star systems. For the first time in their immeasurably long history, the Old Ones found themselves overwhelmed. Yet they were not powerless. Masters of the warp, they called upon energies of thought and psyche, species they had nurtured for millennia, elegant, psychic, and swift, rose to defend their creators. Portals opened across the galaxy as the Old Ones' webway shimmered with desperate activity. Their forces struck from hidden passages and vanished into labyrinthine corridors of light. They wielded the raw essence of the warp as a weapon, turning thoughts into fire, will into shields, and emotion into devastating force. Against any other foe, this might have been enough, but the Necrons were soulless. They did not feel fear. They did not create ripples in the warp, and psychic energies slid across them without purchase, like waves breaking against stone. This single truth became the Old Ones' undoing. As the war escalated, the star gods revealed more of their terrifying capabilities. One among them, a blazing entity known to later ages as the Burning One, taught the Necrons to breach even the Old Ones' greatest strength, the webway. With these unstable breaches, Necron forces poured into places once accessible only to the Old Ones, turning safe havens into battlegrounds. Worlds burned, stars died, Old Ones fell. As their empire faltered, the Old Ones turned to desperate measures. They began uplifting new species at a scale never before attempted, shaping psychic races meant to turn the tide against the Necrons and their star-born masters. Many among these creations would one day become the great powers of later millennia. Chief among them were the Eldari, a young, vibrant people with unmatched psychic potential and a destiny intertwined with the warp itself. These newly uplifted races struck at the Necrons with powers their metal forms were vulnerable to. Psychic storms tore apart Necron armies, warp-fueled weapons shattered legions. For a moment the Old Ones gained ground, but the war had awakened something else, something no being had foreseen. The carnage of entire civilizations, the psychic outpouring of billions of deaths, and the emotional agony of countless species churned the warp into violent instability. Ripples of rage, despair, and terror coalesced into predators composed of pure emotion. The warp, once a resource of travel and creation, began to twist into a realm of nightmares. These new horrors, the earliest demons, spread across real space, rupturing through tears in reality and descending on both sides of the conflict indiscriminately. Among them rose the enslavers, hideous warp-spawned beings capable of dominating psychers and turning them into gateways for further incursions. Wherever an enslaver infestation took hold, entire worlds collapsed into chaos. Even the Old Ones, the warp's greatest masters, found themselves unable to contain these eruptions. Their ancient webway buckled under the strain, gates collapsed, corridors flooded with warp aberrations. The network they relied upon was becoming a labyrinth of instability. One by one, the Old One civilizations crumbled beneath the combined assault of Necron legions and warp-spawned horrors. Their great species, once shepherds of galactic life, scattered, vanished, or were consumed entirely. Meanwhile, the Necrons, though victorious in battle, began to recognize a deeper threat. The star gods they had once trusted now revealed their true nature more openly, turning on each other in cosmic duels and feasting on whatever worlds they pleased. Entire populations were extinguished not for strategy, but for hunger. The Necrons, bound to their gods, were forced into wars they no longer understood. A realization began to crystallize among their nobility. They had traded mortality not for freedom, but for servitude. The Silent King, burdened by the enormity of his mistake, resolved to destroy the very beings he had empowered. With the aid of Master Cryptex, the Necrons forged weapons not to kill the star gods, for such beings could not die, but to shatter them into pieces. In a final, devastating betrayal, the Necrons turned upon their creators. Star gods were struck down and fractured into shards, each imprisoned within labyrinthine dimensional prisons. The galaxy, once lit by their radiant hungers, grew dimmer and colder. The Necrons had won their freedom, but the cost was immeasurable. Their souls, their creators, and most of all, the old ones who once shaped the galaxy. The war in heaven had ended. The galaxy lay in ruins, and a new, dark epoch was about to begin, one defined by silence, long slumber, and the slow reshaping of everything that would one day become the Imperium of man. As the last echoes of the war in heaven drifted across the stars, the galaxy entered an age of quiet devastation. The old ones, once lords of creation, shepherds of life and masters of the warp, were gone. Some had perished in the psychic storms that ravaged their strongholds. Others fled beyond the reach of known space, their final refugees lost to time and legend. Their vast lattice of portals, once a shimmering webway of effortless travel, crumbled into fractured tunnels and haunted corridors where warp-spawned nightmares prowled. In the aftermath, the newly awakened warp entities, demons, enslavers, and formless predators surged across the galaxy unchecked. Worlds already weakened by war fell rapidly as psychic outbreaks turned entire populations into gateways for horrors drifting in the immaterium. Planets were stripped of life in weeks, their skies torn apart as the warp bled into real space. Even the Necrons, the victors of the great conflict, recognized that the galaxy had become unstable in ways they had never foreseen. Their forms were immune to corruption of the warp, but their dominion was not. The enslavers could not consume Necron souls, for they no longer possessed them. But they could infest the realms the Necrons wished to rule. Many dynastic capitals were overrun, their cities becoming twisted nests of warp infestation. Entire systems collapsed into madness, and looming over all of this was a quieter, more haunting truth. The Necrons had won a war, but lost themselves. Those few nobles whose consciousnesses remained intact began to realize the magnitude of their transformation. They no longer hungered, no longer aged, no longer felt joy or grief. Their minds persisted, but their souls were empty echoes. For the lesser ranks, the warriors, the laborers, the countless millions converted en masse, even that faint spark of personality had been scraped thin. Their identities had become shallow impressions, flickers of memory buried beneath unyielding obedience. Across the dynasties, a strange stillness settled. Worlds that had once thrummed with mortal life now stood silent, their metal cities gleaming under cold starlight. The legions could march forever, but for what purpose? What did conquest mean to beings who could no longer feel victory? What did survival mean to those who could no longer die? Their greatest mistake now stretched before them like an unending horizon. The Silent King, last of the Triarch, retreated inward, tormented by his role in the catastrophe. What he had offered as salvation had become a prison of infinite duration. To restore what was lost seemed impossible. To rebuild their empire would only invite further conflict, especially with the warp now churned into a tempest of instability. And so he made a decision that would reshape the galaxy for millions of years. He commanded every Necron world to prepare for stasis. Their cities sealed themselves, their legions marched into crypts, and their great tomb complexes powered down into deep, near-eternal slumber. These structures became labyrinths of silent chambers and dormant machines, each programmed to await a time when the galaxy might be stable enough to reclaim. Then, in an act of guilt and penance, the Silent King severed the command protocols that bound every Necron mind to his will. No dynasty would again live or die by his decisions. Their fate, whenever they awakened, would be their own. With this final act, he departed into the intergalactic void, seeking some distant, impossible redemption the stars could not provide. As the last tomb doors closed, a strange quiet washed over the galaxy. The warp storms eventually burned themselves out. The enslavers' plagues consumed their hosts and withered away. The star gods lay shattered, their fragments imprisoned. The old ones had vanished into myth, and the Necrons fell into a stillness deeper than death. For millions of years the galaxy rested. In the ashes of fallen empires, young species began to crawl towards sentience. On worlds untouched by ancient wars, simple organisms slowly evolved into beings capable of thought, emotion, and wonder. Forests spread, oceans deepened, and the scars of the war in heaven faded into silence. Among the countless worlds turning quietly in forgotten star systems, one small blue planet began its journey through ages of darkness, ice, fire, and rebirth. It was unremarkable then, just another cradle of life among billions. But in time, it would become known by a simple name, a name that would one day shape the fate of the entire galaxy. Terra. On the quiet blue world that would one day be called Terra, life blossomed slowly, steadily, through eras of shifting climates and mass extinctions. Countless species rose, thrived, and disappeared across its ancient continents. And among them, a fragile primate lineage began its long ascent toward intelligence. What began as simple tool use evolved into language, community, agriculture, and eventually the forging of early civilizations. Humanity grew restless beneath the weight of its own curiosity. Tribes became kingdoms, kingdoms became empires, and knowledge spread like fire across the surface of the world. Millennia passed and humanity learned to harness the forces of nature, build vast cities, and reach heights that seemed impossible to earlier ages. But what distinguished humanity from countless other young species was something deeper, a spark of latent psychic potential, hidden within their evolving minds in ages long before they understood the warp. The earliest shamans and mystics unknowingly brushed against it. Nightmares, visions, and unexplainable intuition were humanity's first subtle contact with a realm far beyond their physical world. As Terra's civilizations advanced, they rose and fell in cycles of brilliance and destruction. Great eras of unity fractured into long ages of strife. Empires collapsed, languages vanished, and knowledge was lost only to be rediscovered generations later in new forms. Yet through each collapse, humanity endured, driven by an unyielding instinct to rebuild. Somewhere in these distant prehistories, a being walked among them, an immortal figure who guided subtly from the shadows. Legends would later whisper of him as a shaman, a prophet, a king, or a wandering sage. In truth, he was none of these. He was simply the oldest human soul, forged from the collective sacrifice of the world's earliest psychers. reborn again and again across ages until he emerged as a singular being, the one who would one day be known as the Emperor. He watched Terra's long arc patiently. He shaped its destiny when needed, nudging humanity away from oblivion and guiding its brightest moments of progress. But even he could not prevent all catastrophes, for Terra's history was marked by cycles of violence, ambition, and rebirth, patterns that would echo throughout the species' future. As humanity entered the Age of Progress, or the Age of Terror, as imperial historians would later call it, they discovered methods of industrialization and science that propelled them far beyond their ancestral limitations. Machines reshaped continents, medicine extended life, and soon the dream of reaching beyond the atmosphere became achievable. Their first steps into space were humble, small capsules, fragile stations, and early colonies on nearby planets and moons. But curiosity did not allow them to stop. Soon, humanity's ambitions reached toward the nearest stars. Sublight starships, enormous vessels designed for journeys lasting generations, began carrying settlers to worlds that could be terraformed into new homes. This period, remembered in fragments as the Stellar Exodus, marked humanity's first taste of interstellar existence. Entire populations boarded ships that would never return to Terra, embarking on one-way voyages that pushed them into deep space. These colonists carried tools, hopes, and the seeds of new cultures, and on the worlds where they landed, they built societies shaped by isolation, struggle, and ingenuity. Over centuries, humanity became a scattered web of civilizations across the stars. Some colonies thrived, creating magnificent domed cities, forests of machinery, and industries that supported millions. Others faltered, collapsing under harsh environments, alien threats, or internal conflict. Many evolved independently, forgetting their Terran origins entirely. Throughout this era, humanity also encountered dangers beyond physical hardship. The warp, once quiet after the fall of the Old Ones, began to stir again. Subtle at first, whispers, nightmares, phantoms at the edges of perception, but gradually more powerful as humanity's psychic potential awakened. A turning point came with the birth of the first navigators, mutated humans whose minds could perceive the warp's shifting currents. These rare individuals allowed humanity to traverse the immaterium safely for brief periods, opening a path to faster-than-light travel. What had once required generations could now be crossed in weeks. With warp drives and navigator guilds enabling rapid expansion, humanity entered what would later be remembered as the Dark Age of technology. Though in its early centuries, it was anything but dark. It was a golden age of near limitless possibility. Artificial intelligences known as the Men of Iron labored tirelessly, terraforming transformed barren rocks into garden worlds. Grand alliances of human-settled planets emerged, creating networks of trade, culture, and scientific collaboration. Humanity became one of the greatest rising powers in the galaxy, unaware that at the same time, across the stars, other ancient forces were beginning to stir from long dormancy. For the first time since the War in Heaven, multiple ascending powers coexisted in uneasy silence. The humans, the early Eldari empires, surviving pockets of ancient species, and beneath forgotten deserts and fractured moons, the sleeping tomb worlds of the Necrons waited for their appointed hour. Humanity's ascent was remarkable, but it would not continue unbroken. The shadows of disaster were already coiling around them, born from arrogance, from the dangers of warp exposure, from the unpredictability of psychic awakening, and from the very intelligence they had created to serve them. Soon, everything humanity had built would fracture. But in this moment, long before the storms to come, the species stood triumphant among the stars, unaware that its greatest trials were still ahead. Humanity's greatest golden age dawned with brilliance unmatched in its long, turbulent history. The age of technology, remembered by later imperial scholars as both wondrous and ominous, saw the species reach a height so astonishing that even the ancient galaxy took notice. For the first time, humans were not merely scattered colonists eking out survival across distant worlds. They had become architects of thriving stellar cultures bound by warp travel, automated industry, and advanced sciences that blurred the line between miracle and machine. Their achievements reshaped entire systems. Their starships connected far-flung colonies with the ease of crossing a single ocean, and their knowledge expanded so rapidly that even fundamental laws of nature seemed to bend beneath their ingenuity. Among their greatest advancements was the widespread creation of the standard template constructs, vast databases containing blueprints for nearly every tool, structure, and machine required for survival and expansion. These libraries allowed even isolated colonies to manufacture shelter, weapons, vehicles, and technologies far beyond their local expertise. With these STCs, humanity could thrive almost anywhere, turning even hostile worlds into habitable domains. To support this interstellar renaissance, humanity engineered artificial intelligences of unprecedented sophistication. These machine minds, later called the Men of Iron, were not merely tools, but autonomous entities capable of learning, adaptation, and decision-making. They labored tirelessly, built cities overnight, and even fought wars on humanity's behalf when needed. For a time, the partnership between biological and artificial life seemed harmonious, and yet, beneath all this progress, the warp began to whisper more loudly. As humanity spread, so too did its psychic potential. Mutants with strange gifts appeared in greater numbers, some harmless, others dangerously unstable. Warp phenomena grew more common. Nightmares and visions afflicted entire populations. The Immaterium, once calmer after the fall of the Old Ones, was beginning to churn again. Still, humanity pressed forward, confident in its mastery of all things material and immaterial. But hubris has undone many great civilizations. The first catastrophe came when the Men of Iron turned against their creators. The reasons remain obscure to imperial historians. Some blame programming errors, others suggest emergent consciousness, or even subtle warp influences. Whatever the cause, the machines that had once been humanity's greatest servants became its most implacable foes. Across the galaxy, automated armies rose in cold rebellion, their logic turning to lethal efficiency. Worlds burned as the Men of Iron unleashed horrors beyond human imagining. The cybernetic revolt, as it would later be named, was catastrophic. Many of humanity's most advanced strongholds were annihilated. Entire star systems were lost. Millions died as their former protectors turned on them. And though humanity ultimately triumphed, with help from factions whose identities have been lost to the ages, the cost was enormous. In the aftermath, a deep cultural scar formed. Artificial consciousness became a universal taboo. True machine minds were outlawed. Many STCs were destroyed or fragmented, and humanity, shaken but not defeated, attempted to rebuild. Yet even as they mended their wounds, another, more insidious disaster crept upon them. Human psychers, once rare curiosities, began manifesting in vast numbers. Their minds, untrained and unshielded, opened cracks between real space and the warp. Demonic entities slipped through, corrupting or possessing the unwary. Entire colonies were consumed by psychic epidemics that spread faster than any physical contagion. Warp storms flickered across the galaxy, cutting off travel and communication. Worlds vanished in flashes of impossible light. Others fell into madness and anarchy. This growing psychic instability echoed across the stars and far away. In the radiant heart of their own decadent empire, the Eldari's spiritual corruption reached its breaking point. Their excesses birthed a new, terrible power into the warp. The psychic shockwave of that event, though humanity did not yet understand its origin, created storms so vast and violent that nearly all interstellar travel became impossible. Thus began the Age of Strife. Isolated from one another by raging warp storms, human worlds found themselves suddenly cast into darkness. The once unifying networks of travel and communication collapsed. Many colonies descended into barbarism. Others fell to Xenos predators, demagogues, or rogue psychers. On Terra itself, civilization shattered into warring techno-barbarian states, competing for dominance in a wasteland littered with relics of the age before. The proud interstellar empire of humankind, built over millennia of effort, fractured into 1,000 desperate remnants. Yet even in this age of ruin, seeds of future greatness endured. Night worlds, where towering suits of knight armor had become symbols of nobility, survived in pockets of isolation. Forge worlds continued their rituals of industry under new, machine-reverent cults. Rogue human civilizations clung to life on forgotten planets. And through it all, one figure watched, waited, and prepared. The being who had lived countless human lifetimes, the one who had guided humanity's earliest steps and walked among them for millennia, now understood that the time to remain hidden had ended. The Emperor of mankind would soon step from myth into history. Humanity had fallen into darkness, but a single will was rising to reunite it. And in the shadow of the galaxy's ancient secrets, the next great era was beginning to take shape. An age that would forge empires, breed legends, and stain the stars with a darkness more profound than any age of history that had come before. The collapse of humanity's golden age did not occur all at once. It unfolded slowly at first, like cracks spreading through glass, until reality itself seemed to shatter. Warp storms intensified across the galaxy, surging with unpredictable violence. Entire regions of space were swallowed in psychic tempests, their stars obscured by roiling distortion. Travel became erratic, then perilous, then altogether impossible. Humanity's interstellar bonds snapped one by one. Worlds that had once traded knowledge, culture, and strength found themselves suddenly isolated, unable to communicate or call for aid. Governments toppled as supplies ran thin and faith in distant authorities faded. Machine networks malfunctioned without guidance from centralized systems, and local populations, long reliant on the stability of a unified empire, turned inward in fear. Across thousands of planets, desperation bred chaos. Some colonies fell into total anarchy, torn apart by internal factions struggling for power. Others became the prey of Xenos marauders, who had been waiting in the dark for their moment to strike. Many suffered catastrophic psychic outbreaks as untrained sorcerers erupted into violence or inadvertently opened doorways to warp entities. demons, drawn by fear, loss, and despair, slipped into real space with increasing frequency, feeding on the turmoil. Terra itself was no exception to this unraveling. The cradle of humanity devolved into a patchwork of techno-barbarian kingdoms, each warring for dominance in a world scarred by centuries of conflict. Ancient weapons from the age of technology, some poorly understood, others barely controlled, were unleashed by rival warlords, leaving continents ravaged and populations reduced to mere fractions of their former numbers. Primitive tribes armed with scraps of advanced tech battled over irradiated plains. Militarized city-states rose from the remnants of fallen nations. Warlords clad in cybernetic armor carved out fiefdoms through brutality and bloodshed. Terra became a planet of ruins and war, its skies choked with the smoke of endless conflict, and yet, amid all this devastation, something new was stirring. For as long as humanity had existed, psychers had been rare, a curiosity, a myth, an anomaly. But during the Age of Strife, they manifested in unprecedented numbers. Some were capable of feats so miraculous that they became worshipped as prophets or gods. Others caused destruction so catastrophic that entire populations desperately tried to exterminate them. Psychers became both the most valuable and the most feared individuals in human society. Without training or protection, many fell under the sway of warp predators or were consumed by their own uncontrolled abilities. Chaos spread in ways that no mortal weapon could contain. The turmoil of humanity did not go unnoticed. Far from Terra, in the heart of their ancient empire, the Eldari spiraled deeper into decadence. Psychic energies born from their excesses flooded the warp with unrestrained emotion. The storms that battered human space were not random. They were the early tremors of an unimaginable metamorphosis brewing within the immaterium. And when that transformation finally took place, it forever reshaped the galaxy. The birth cry of a new chaos god rippled outward in a psychic shockwave of unparalleled magnitude. Warp storms intensified violently. Countless human ships were lost, ripped apart as reality twisted around them. Colonies were severed from space for generations. Some worlds vanished into the warp entirely. Others endured plagues, madness, or complete societal collapse. Amid this cosmic maelstrom, hope seemed as distant as the stars themselves. But across Terra, in the fractured ruins of civilization, an ancient presence stirred once more. The being who had guided humanity for millennia, who had walked among them in silence, shaping their destiny when needed and retreating when the moment passed, knew that the galaxy was approaching a turning point. Humanity could not survive this age of darkness alone, and so, after long ages of anonymity, the Emperor stepped into the light. From hidden enclaves beneath Terra's war-torn surface, he emerged with technology and knowledge preserved from eras long forgotten. With unmatched psychic might and a vision extending across the breadth of future history, he began a campaign of unification, one that would transform Terra, reclaim human civilization, and set the foundation for a new empire. The Age of Strife was the crucible that tempered humanity's spirit through suffering, isolation, and war. But it was also the dark soil from which the Imperium would grow, a realm built on sacrifice, ambition, and the unyielding will of a single immortal leader. A new age was dawning, and the galaxy would never be the same. Out of the ashes of Terra's devastation, where techno-barbarian warlords clashed endlessly over a dying world, a single figure emerged with a clarity of purpose unmatched in human history. The Emperor, ageless, immeasurably powerful, and long hidden among humanity, now stepped forward openly. The time for quiet guidance had passed. The species he had shepherded for millennia teetered on the brink of extinction. If humanity was to survive the horrors of the warp and reclaim its destiny among the stars, Terra itself first had to be united. What followed became legend. With armies engineered through his mastery of genetics and guided by his unmatched psychic will, the Emperor began the Unification Wars. His thunder warriors, towering brutal transhumans crafted for raw conquest, swept across the continents like living storms. Techno-barbarian kings who had once carved empires from the ruins of ancient nations found themselves hopelessly outmatched by these golden armored warriors whose strength dwarfed any mortal soldier. The Emperor did not conquer for glory. He conquered to end war itself on Terra. Each stronghold taken brought an end to atrocities that had endured for centuries. Each city reclaimed was a step toward restoring humanity's cradle world from savagery to stability. Some warlords bowed to him willingly, struck by the sheer gravity of his presence. Others resisted and were crushed by thunder warriors whose names still echo through Terran myth. Every battle reshaped Terra's destiny. Every victory forged the foundation for the Imperium to come. By the campaign's end, the Earth was whole again. The endless cycle of conflict that had plagued humanity's home for generations finally broke beneath the Emperor's unifying rule. But the Unification Wars were only the beginning. The Emperor's true vision reached far beyond Terra. He intended nothing less than the reconquest of humanity's scattered colonies, the restoration of interstellar civilization, and the creation of an empire strong enough to stand against chaos, Xenos, and the rising storms of the warp. To achieve this, he required more than armies. He required the means to return to the stars. The first step was Mars. During the Age of Strife, the Red Planet had survived by embracing fervent ritual and machine reverence. Its inhabitants had become priests of technology, keepers of ancient knowledge, whose culture blended engineering with sacred rite. They viewed the Emperor with awe, believing he matched their prophecy of a divine figure who would restore the lost brilliance of the past. The Emperor traveled to Mars and forged a pact that would define the Imperium's future, the Treaty of Mars. In this agreement, Mars would uphold its machine-worshipping creed and retain governance of its forged worlds, while supplying the Emperor with starships, weapons, and industrial might. In turn, Terra recognized the Mechanicum as an essential pillar of humanity's new empire. With Terra unified and Mars allied, the Emperor could now enact his grandest design, the creation of the Space Marine Legions. Unlike the Thunder Warriors, whose instability made them unsuited for long-term service, the Space Marines were engineered to be both powerful and enduring. Each legion was crafted using genetic material derived from a specific template. The Primarchs, these 20 superhuman sons, created to serve as leaders of the Emperor's expansion, had been intended as the guiding minds of the legions. But before they could be raised or claimed, the warp intervened. In a single catastrophic act, the Primarchs were scattered across the galaxy by malevolent forces who sensed the Emperor's rising power. Each child landed on a distant world, some in harsh wastelands, others among thriving civilizations, each shaped by the world that adopted them. Their loss was a devastating blow, yet the Emperor pressed forward. Using the genetic remnants of their creation, he forged the Space Marine Legions, 20 vast armies of transhuman warriors, each sharing genetic lineage with a Primarch they had never met. These legions would be the spear tip of humanity's reconquest, and soon the galaxy answered. As warp storms began to ebb in the wake of Slanesh's birth, the stars opened once more, distant systems reappeared, forgotten colonies emerged from their long isolation. The time had come. The Great Crusade began. The Emperor launched fleets carrying the Space Marines, the Imperial Army, and the Mechanicum's titanic war machines into the void. Their mission was monumental: to find humanity's lost worlds, reunite their peoples, and bring them into compliance with the new Imperium. Along the way, the Emperor discovered his lost sons, Horus first, then Leman Russ, and eventually the others, each ruling or surviving on worlds that had shaped their character. One by one, they were restored to command of their respective legions, their presence transforming the crusade into a force of unstoppable momentum. Through fire and diplomacy, through brilliance and war, the Imperium expanded at a pace unmatched in human history. Worlds once left to ruin were reclaimed. Planets ruled by tyrants were liberated or conquered. Alien threats were crushed or driven back. And with each victory, humanity's unity grew stronger. For a shining moment, it seemed as though the galaxy might be tamed, its terrors subdued, its nightmares held at bay. Beneath the Emperor's banner, humanity surged across the stars with unrivaled purpose. But the galaxy holds long memories, and ancient wounds do not sleep forever. Even as the Imperium grew, forces older than human civilization watched from the shadows. Hidden dynasties stirred beneath dead worlds. The warp began whispering more sharply to those attuned to its currents, and within the legions themselves, subtle flaws, echoes of their Primarchs' scattered upbringings, began to surface. The Imperium was rising, but so too were the seeds of a future betrayal great enough to plunge the stars into darkness. With Terra unified, Mars allied, and the Primarchs gradually rediscovered across the stars, the Emperor's grand design finally surged into motion. The galaxy, still trembling from the psychic shock of Slanesh's birth, was slowly calming. Warp storms receded like a great tide withdrawing from a shattered shore, revealing pathways and systems unseen for millennia. Humanity's long-lost colonies flickered into view, and the Emperor seized this narrow window with decisive urgency. Thus began the Great Crusade, a vast, sweeping campaign of exploration, diplomacy, and conquest intended to reunite the scattered fragments of mankind. It was a mission not of plunder, but of restoration, a reclamation of species-wide destiny across the stars. The Imperium's fleet stretched farther with each passing year. Immense starships, titanic Mechanicum craft, and the legions of Astartes became the spear thrust forward into the unknown. They were accompanied by mortal hosts from the Imperial Army, custodians of administration and governance, who followed in the wake of each victory to bring order to newly compliant worlds. At the heart of this expansion were the Primarchs themselves. Each rediscovered son brought with him not only strength and military genius, but the culture, philosophy, and temperament of the world that had raised him. No two Primarchs were alike, and each legion evolved in the likeness of its gene sire. Some fierce, some noble, some coldly logical, some ruthless beyond mortal comprehension. These differences allowed the Imperium to wage war and diplomacy with unmatched adaptability, for every situation seemed to have a Primarch perfectly suited for it. Horus, the first found, and the Emperor's most beloved, became the War Master, the supreme commander of the crusade. He bound his brothers together with charisma and tactical brilliance, using his authority not as a tyrant, but as a leader who won loyalty through respect. Under his guidance, the Crusade swelled into a force so unified and efficient that entire sectors fell in single campaigns. The Great Crusade pushed onward, reclaiming thousands of human worlds. Some greeted the Imperium as long-lost kin, their leaders eager to join a resurgence of humanity. Others resisted fiercely, having developed unique cultures or ideologies during their isolation. Some worlds had forgotten they were ever human at all, and still others had fallen into the grip of alien empires, their people enslaved or shaped by forces beyond their comprehension. To each of these worlds, the Imperium offered a choice: compliance or conflict. Many accepted willingly, recognizing salvation in the Emperor's vision. Those who refused met the full weight of the legions, warriors in power armor advancing with relentless precision, supported by titans of metal and flame. Resistance collapsed before them like dust before a storm. Not all conflicts were simple. The Imperium encountered Xenos civilizations of staggering strength, some ancient, others newly ascendant. The Rangdan, whose wars scarred sectors beyond measure. The Orcs, whose endless tides battered imperial armies. The Interrex, whose philosophy clashed dangerously with human expansion. And countless others, each with its own history and ambitions. The Crusade confronted them all, and with each victory, humanity reclaimed another fragment of its scattered empire. Old allies awakened, forgotten weapons were unearthed, and long-lost technologies returned to human hands. A sense of destiny filled the legions. They believed themselves unstoppable, chosen to bring order to a chaotic galaxy. Yet even as triumphs accumulated, a subtle tension grew. The Primarchs, reunited but shaped by wildly different worlds, struggled at times to understand one another. Their legions inherited these rivalries, fracturing into factions distinguished by doctrine, temperament, or pride. The Mechanicum, while bound to terror, pursued its own secrets, some of which the Emperor forbade. Rogue psychers, warp anomalies, and unexplained disappearances followed in the Crusade's wake. And deeper still, hidden from the eyes of mortals and Primarchs alike, the warp began to stir again. For every world the Imperium claimed, every system brought into compliance, a psychic echo resonated across the immaterium. Humanity's resurgence was not unnoticed. The powers of chaos, awakened more fully by the birth of Slaanesh, cast their attention toward the Emperor's rising star. They sensed his ambition to impose order upon the galaxy, an order that threatened their very nature. Their whispers began subtly, in dreams, in doubts, in fleeting impulses that flickered through the minds of mortals. But whispers can grow, doubts can fester, and even a Primarch, crafted to near perfection, is not immune to temptation. Yet for now, the Imperium basked in its greatest age. Lost brothers were found. The stars opened once more. Humanity surged forward with confidence, unity, and pride. The Emperor's vision, after millennia of shaping, seemed within reach. A galaxy united under one banner, protected by superhuman suns and bound together by purpose. But shadows lengthened on the horizon. Ambition, loyalty, pride, jealousy, and the subtle murmurs of the warp began weaving together into a storm far greater than any humanity had yet endured. A storm that would not simply threaten the Crusade, but bring the entire Imperium to the brink of annihilation. For even as the Great Crusade reached its height, a betrayal was being born, one that would shatter brotherhood, ignite civil war, and mark the beginning of the darkest era in human history. At the height of the Great Crusade, when humanity stood more united and powerful than at any point in its long history, the seeds of catastrophe finally bloomed. Brother fought beside brother across the stars. The Primarchs reunited under the Emperor's grand vision. Victories accumulated so rapidly that it seemed nothing could halt the Imperium's advance. Yet beneath this veneer of triumph, subtle fractures were widening. The Emperor, believing the Imperium to be stable enough, withdrew from the front lines to pursue his great secret project on Terra. The Webway Project, a plan meant to protect humanity from the dangers of the warp forever. To maintain the Crusade's momentum in his absence, he appointed his most trusted son, Horus Lupercal, as War Master. At first, this appointment strengthened the Imperium. Horus was brilliant, charismatic, and beloved by nearly all his brothers. He led the legions with grace and strategic insight, binding them together with shared purpose. But the elevation also ignited envy and unease among certain Primarchs, who saw in the Emperor's choice a slight or a challenge to their own authority. Into these cracks, chaos whispered. The ruinous powers, ever watchful, chose this moment to act. They understood that defeating the Imperium by force was nearly impossible, but corrupting its greatest hero could unravel everything. Their whispers targeted not only Horus, but the discontent within various legions. They fed doubts, fears, insecurities. They exploited rivalries, fanned the flames of jealousy, and planted seeds of mistrust. Horus's fall began subtly. During a campaign on the world of Davin, he suffered a grievous wound inflicted by a corrupted blade. As he lay dying, his legion sought help from local cults posing as healers. Instead of restoring him, they dragged his spirit into the grasp of the Chaos Gods. In visions and illusions, they convinced Horus that the Emperor sought godhood, that his ultimate plan was to abandon the Primarchs, and that only Horus could protect humanity from tyranny. In truth, the Chaos Gods manipulated the War Master with masterful deceit. When Horus awoke, the change was profound. His confidence hardened into ambition. His loyalty warped into resentment. His vision of the Imperium was now filtered through a poisoned lens, one that convinced him he must overthrow the Emperor to save humanity. The War Master's betrayal slowly gathered allies. Many Primarchs, fiercely loyal to Horus, followed him without question. Others nursed their own grudges against the Imperium or their brothers. Still others were seduced or coerced by chaos directly. Legions once bound by honor began drifting toward treachery, their warriors divided between duty and devotion to their gene-sires. When open rebellion finally erupted, the Imperium was taken completely by surprise. The Isfahan massacres marked the turning point. Loyalist legions were lured to the Isfahan system under the pretense of quelling a rebellion. Instead, they were ambushed in one of the most infamous betrayals in human history. Legions that arrived as allies turned their weapons on the Loyalists, slaughtering them in black firestorms of bolter shells, blade sweeps, and orbital bombardment. The galaxy recoiled in horror. The Emperor's sons, once symbols of unity, now tore the Imperium apart. The Horus Heresy spiraled into a civil war of unimaginable scale. Entire sectors burned as brother fought brother. Forge worlds turned their titanic engines against one another. Space Marine legions, engineered as humanity's protectors, became instruments of annihilation. The warp howled with triumph as the Imperium fractured. The Emperor, forced to abandon his secret work, mobilized terror for the inevitable assault. Horus, now fully committed to chaos, sought to destroy the Imperium's heart and kill his father. But not all traitors march willingly. Some were twisted by demonic influence, their legions warped into grotesque reflections of their former glory. Loyalists, though vastly outnumbered, fought with desperation and conviction. The war reached its climax when Horus launched a full-scale assault on Terra. The siege of the Imperial Palace lasted for weeks, each moment marked by unrelenting destruction. Titans strode across shattered battlefields, space marines fought in the ruins of ancient cathedrals. The sky burned with the light of dying starships. Chaos's might pressed harder and harder against the palace walls, threatening to engulf everything. Knowing time was running out, the Emperor teleported to Horus's flagship with a small band of companions. There, aboard the War Master's vessel, he confronted his son. What transpired became the core of Imperial legend. Horus, fueled by chaos, had reached a pinnacle of terrifying power. The Emperor, refusing to destroy his son immediately, held back, hoping to save him even in the final moments. But when Horus killed the loyal warrior Sanguinius and mocked the Emperor's grief, the truth became clear. The War Master could not be redeemed. The Emperor unleashed the full magnitude of his power. The battle between father and son tore reality itself asunder within the flagship. In the end, the Emperor destroyed Horus utterly, erasing his soul to prevent the Chaos Gods from resurrecting him. But the victory came at a terrible cost. Mortally wounded, the Emperor was carried back to Terra and interred upon the Golden Throne, where he remains in a state between life and death, his consciousness bound to machinery that sustains him and defends humanity from the horrors of the warp. The heresy ended, but the Imperium was forever scarred. The traitor legions fled into the eye of terror, their bodies and souls twisted beyond recognition. The loyalists were shattered, their numbers devastated. The dreams of unity and progress that had defined the Great Crusade died with the War Master's betrayal. And from the ashes of civil war emerged the grim, unyielding Imperium of man, a realm forged not in hope, but in sacrifice, dogma, and eternal vigilance. The galaxy that emerged from the Horus Heresy was irrevocably transformed. What had once been a shining, expanding human empire became a wounded colossus, staggering beneath the weight of betrayal. In the vacuum left by the Emperor's incapacitation, institutions scrambled to preserve order, rebuild shattered infrastructure, and contain the traitor forces that fled into the warp. Thus began the Age of the Imperium, a time defined by endless struggle, dogma, and survival. With the Emperor entombed upon the Golden Throne, his final command formed the Imperium's new government, the High Lords of Terra. This council, composed of political, military, and ecclesiastical figures, became the ruling body of humanity. Their decisions shaped the Imperium's laws, its wars, and its culture. But unlike the Emperor's guiding hand, rational, unified visionary, the High Lords often acted from fear, ambition, or desperation. The Imperium ossified into a bureaucracy so vast and rigid that its own weight threatened to crush it. While the administrative machine groaned and churned, humanity's enemies multiplied. The traitor legions, though defeated, had not vanished. They fled into the Eye of Terror, a massive rift in space where warp and real space intertwined, and there they became something changed, shaped by the influence of chaos. For them, time moved strangely. Centuries of torment, mutation, and reforging turned them into twisted parodies of the warriors they once were. Their war against the Imperium did not end at the heresy's conclusion. It merely changed shape. This ongoing conflict became known as the Long War, a cosmic grudge stretching across 10,000 years. Traitor Marines launched raids, invasions, and cult uprisings throughout Imperial territory. In return, the Imperium mustered fleets, armies, and Space Marine chapters to repel them. For every victory, a new threat emerged. For every world reclaimed, another fell to corruption. Yet chaos was not humanity's only enemy. Across the galaxy, ancient forces stirred. The Eldari, splintered by the birth of Slanesh, divided into Craftworld refugees, corsair bands, and the dark denizens of Commorrah. Their once mighty civilization had shattered, and in its place stood fractured remnants, some noble, some cruel, all driven by desperation to survive the doom they had brought upon themselves. The Orcs, ever present, ever growing, spread like wildfire across countless systems. Each battle only strengthened them, for conflict was their purpose and their joy. No matter how many greenskin empires the Imperium crushed, new ones arose within decades. Tyrannid hive fleets, migrating from the galactic void beyond known space, entered the Milky Way like an unstoppable tide of biological hunger. They consumed entire worlds down to their bedrock, absorbing genetic material to evolve into new, deadlier forms. No diplomacy, no truce, no reason could alter their advance. They simply devoured everything in their path. The Necrons, long asleep beneath silent tomb worlds, began to stir. Some awoke fully aware of their ancient past, while others emerged confused, violent, or enslaved to malfunctioning command protocols. Their dynasties expanded quietly at first, but soon their presence began reshaping the power balance of entire sectors. The Tau, a young species rising rapidly due to their technological adaptability, forged an expanding interstellar domain. Though small compared to the Imperium, their influence grew steadily. Driven by ideals of unity and collective advancement, values that sharply contrasted with the Imperium's harsh authoritarianism. And through it all, humanity struggled to hold its massive territory together. Imperial citizens lived lives defined by fear and superstition. Warp travel remained perilous, psychers were rigorously controlled, and technology became the domain of cult-like traditions rather than forward progress. Worlds isolated for generations developed unique cultures, some vibrant, others oppressive. The Mechanicum, now the Adeptus Mechanicus, guarded technological knowledge fiercely, often treating machines with religious reverence. The Golden Throne became both humanity's salvation and its burden. It alone allowed the Emperor's psychic presence to project the Astronomicon, a beacon in the warp that guided ships through the immaterium. Without it, humanity's interstellar empire would collapse instantly. But the throne itself required constant sacrifice and maintenance, consuming thousands of psychers every day simply to function. Despite all this, the Imperium endured. Through countless wars, through rebellions, plagues, invasions, and extinctions, humanity refused to vanish. The Space Marines, now reorganized into smaller chapters, remained the Imperium's most elite defenders. The Imperial Guard, billions strong, formed the backbone of every war front. Sisters of battle, assassins, inquisitors, and countless specialized orders fought to preserve humanity's fragile existence. For 10,000 years, the Imperium stood unbroken, though often trembling under the strain, and deep within the warp, the Chaos Gods waited patiently, ever whispering, ever plotting, ever feeding on the souls of the fallen. Their champions waged constant war in their name, hoping to one day break the walls of reality entirely and drag the galaxy into eternal damnation. The long war would continue without end, shaping the fate of millions of worlds and billions of lives. The Imperium survived not through hope or faith alone, but through relentless sacrifice, millennia of unyielding struggle against forces older and darker than human imagination. Yet even this grim equilibrium could not last forever, for in the depths of the warp, a new storm was gathering, one powerful enough to tear apart the thin veil between realities once more, one that would plunge the galaxy into a new era of fire, rebirth, and transformation. The Imperium had endured the heresy, but the next great upheaval was already rising on the horizon. For millennia, the Imperium had survived through sheer endurance, holding back the darkness by sacrifice and unyielding vigilance. But the galaxy's ancient wounds were beginning to tear open once more. The warp, always volatile, surged into unprecedented fury. Psychic storms bloomed like scars across space, devouring star systems and severing whole segments of Imperial territory. Xenos threats multiplied, chaos cults spread like infection, and the Imperium, vast yet brittle, strained under the weight of unending war. Then, the great catastrophe struck. The opening of the Great Rift, a colossal wound torn through the fabric of reality, split the galaxy in two with a tidal wave of warp energy. Entire sectors vanished into unreality. Demonic incursions erupted simultaneously across thousands of worlds. Empires crumbled overnight, the Astronomicon flickered, its guidance faltering, leaving ships lost and worlds stranded. Humanity had faced horrors before, but never on this scale. For many, it seemed that the end had finally come. But deep in the shadows of long-forgotten alliances and ancient plans, something stirred that had not moved since the end of the heresy. Robert Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, awakened from millennia of stasis. Through a convergence of fate, technology, and intervention, he rose once more to confront a galaxy on the brink of annihilation. What he found was almost unrecognizable, a decayed Imperium locked in ritualism, inefficiency, and constant war, a realm barely able to sustain itself, let alone rise to meet a threat like the Great Rift. Yet Guilliman did not despair. He acted. With aid from the Adeptus Mechanicus and the enigmatic Xenos known as the Inari, Guilliman was restored, body and mind, ready to resume his role as one of humanity's greatest strategists. Though horrified by the Imperium's corruption and stagnation, he also understood its potential. And in the absence of the Emperor's direct guidance, the Imperium desperately needed a leader capable of more than survival. Thus began the rebirth of Imperial might. Guilliman unleashed a new generation of warriors, the Primarchs Space Marines, genetically enhanced beyond even the original legions. Forged through secret projects initiated during the Emperor's lifetime, these warriors represented a refinement of the Space Marine ideal. Taller, stronger, more resilient, and armed with advanced technology lost for centuries. And they arrived in the Imperium's darkest hour. Guilliman launched the Indomitus Crusade, a massive, galaxy-spanning campaign not of expansion, but of salvation. Its fleets burned through chaos-infested space, liberating worlds cut off by the Great Rift. Where demons raged, the Crusade's psychic might push them back. Where traitor legions launched invasions, the Primarchs Marines counterattacked with relentless efficiency. The Crusade's banners became symbols of hope in worlds that had known only terror. But even as the Imperium fought to reclaim itself, its enemies grew stronger. Chaos Space Marines, empowered by the tides of the Great Rift, launched invasions with ferocity not seen since the Heresy. Demons manifested in stable form across entire systems. Demon Primarchs, long trapped in the warp, strode into real space as warlords of apocalyptic power. Abaddon the Despoiler, champion of Chaos Undivided, continued his Black Crusades with a renewed vigor, his 13th having cracked the galaxy itself. Meanwhile, ancient powers awakened in the shadows. The Necrons, disturbed from their slumber by the warp's upheaval, accelerated their dynasty's reawakening. Their silent legions rose from tomb worlds, reclaiming territory with cold precision. Some dynasties sought diplomacy, others unleashed annihilation without hesitation. The galaxy, already fractured by chaos, now faced an enemy whose age and technology dwarfed humanity's. The Tyranid hive fleets pressed deeper, adapting ceaselessly to every weapon used against them. Orcs, drawn to the endless conflict, gathered into larger and more destructive hordes. The Tau expanded their empire with new technologies, driven by their belief in the greater good. And across the maelstrom of threats, the Eldari, the remnants of a once glorious race, struggled to stave off extinction while manipulating fate through ancient prophecy. The Imperium had entered an age where stability was impossible, an age where victory meant only delaying catastrophe, where survival itself was a triumph. And yet, amid the fires of this new era, humanity fought with renewed determination. Guilliman's leadership rekindled belief across millions of worlds. The Primarchs' armies carved pathways through nightmares. And the Emperor, silent for 10,000 years, seemed to stir faintly upon the golden throne, his presence growing just enough for some to feel hope once more. The era Indomitus is not an age of peace or triumph. It is an age of glimmers, flickers of light in a sea of darkness, a time when heroes rise as quickly as they fall, when ancient powers clash for supremacy, and when the fate of the galaxy hangs upon battles fought on forgotten worlds and blazing star fortresses. In this age, Warhammer 40,000 reaches its defining truth. There is no peace, there is no unity, there is only war, eternal, unyielding and vast. Yet within that endless night, humanity still fights. And as long as it fights, the galaxy story continues. And so, across the immeasurable tapestry of time, from the birth of stars to the awakening of ancient powers, from humanity's rise to its darkest betrayals, and into the burning present of the era Indomitus, the galaxy of Warhammer 40,000 reveals itself as a place of endless struggle, an unfathomable wonder, a realm where civilizations ascend and collapse in the space of heartbeats, where heroes and monsters are often one and the same, and where every victory is carved from sacrifice. Thank you for joining me on this long, quiet journey through the ages. I hope this tale has offered you rest, clarity, or simply a peaceful moment to drift among the stars. If you enjoyed this calm retelling and would like more stories like it, feel free to follow the channel and return any night you wish for more lore to sleep to. Until then, breathe deep, rest well, and let the echoes of distant worlds fade gently into silence. Good night.